What are organizational policies? So I just would want to give you a background. We had studied all through that we need to, as organizations and people working in organization, because the organization doesn't have its own kind of, um, you know, eyes or ears or hands or legs. We are the eyes and ears of the organization. Now we have to run that organization in a certain fashion, which is how that organization will be prevented from getting into all kinds of problems or what we call as risks. And so many of us work in organizations. So how do we work? How do we conduct ourselves in various areas of work that we do or functions that we do? And how do we understand equally what needs to be done? So an X and a Y and a Z are there in the organization. What is it that binds them commonly in terms of understanding how to conduct oneself for whatever functions or areas that you need to work on, primarily as your job responsibility, but otherwise also in terms of dealing with other functions. Now that is something that needs to be uh, kind of decided by way of providing a framework for all these areas. Now, that framework is what I call as internal control or controls that brings in the concept of internal controls. And we'll do risks and controls more in detail for you to understand what is the meaning of controls. So, policies or organizational policies, as they are called, they are the documents which help you, or they are, written guidelines that help you in understanding consistently. All of the organization staff will understand that policy in the same fashion. Okay. It's not that X will understand differently, Y will, and Z will differently. They'll all understand it equally. Similarly, in terms of what is expected from them in terms of behaving in a particular area for conducting or for achieving their work, and of course the mission of the organization. So some particular framework needs to be created, and that framework becomes your guide. And that framework also helps you to ensure that you do not get out of the the framework of controls into an area where because of your action you cause harm to the organization, or that's what is called as risk. So broadly, that is the background why organizations need to have policies. Okay. These policies are what are called as rules and regulations or guidelines for the smooth operation of that organization. Now, these are rules, regulations, guidelines, guiding principles on the basis of which, say, for instance, in the area of finance, say, for instance, in the area of HR, say, for instance, in the area of program implementation, or risk management, all those are areas in which or admin or procurement, they will actually guide you as to how work has to be done. So that is what organizational policies do. Organizational policies, they are a framework, as I have said, for decision making, because you have to take a lot of decisions day in and day out. Day in and day out, you make decisions. Organizational policies are, something that helps us to as a matter of internal controls. Now, what is internal controls? Internal controls are internal guidelines. Okay, so the policies themselves being internal guidelines, or guidelines for helping us become a tool of internal control. Now, their policies are in various functions. Now, please remember that when we are talking of policies, we are talking of policies in terms of various areas of our work. And policies are not standard, okay, in the sense that you cannot say policy is a standard document which will apply to all organizations. And that's the big mistake that organizations do when they are actually making policies. They will pick up policy from somewhere and just implement it, I mean just put it on record, say that this is my policy. However, the implementation of the policy is nowhere linked to the actual formulation of the policy. And in that sense, you are neither doing justice with making that policy, nor are you providing for the requisite internal controls or framework for people in the organization to function. The organization is exposed to a lot of risk. So what is important is that every time that an organization thinks about creating a policy in a particular area. Why? Because now you think that you need to have some framework uh, for conduct of behavior in that area. Then that policy has to be relevant to your organization at the stage at which that organization is, and that document needs to be revisited continuously to be able to see that if as you are progressing you are not able to provide for a certain particular action as you have grown, then that can be brought into the policy framework. There is nothing which prevents us from treating the policy document as a dynamic document. It is a dynamic document, and the document is evolving over time. It's evolving, it's not something which is fixed once and then will continue. It will happen only when you make your policy documents in such a fashion that they are related to what needs to be done at that particular point of time. And as the organization grows, then that particular policy also has to be modified or revised to bring in more changes that have happened in our organization, which also needs to be addressed. Now, this is the one very critical factor in an effective organization policy, which sometimes doesn't happen. Sometimes the policy might not be implementable because of reasons that we thought it should be implementable, but then also we can revise it so that it becomes more relevant to our situation. So there is nothing which prevents us from revising policies, and therefore when I say organizational policies, they have to be tailor made to your requirement. They cannot be straight jacketed, they cannot be standard policies. And that's the very big mistake that that organizations do, especially the small and medium ones, where they do not realize the importance of policies, but because they need to provide a policy document to donors and to external stakeholders, they just copy paste. That's not what the intention has to be. Okay. The areas where you want to have policies is something also which will depend on how you are growing. If you are a small organizations, you might need a very elementary small policy. You don't need a 100-page policy. The other day I was looking at an organization policy where there are only 4 5 people, and it's a 100-page policy. I mean, they are talking of so many committees. You can't have those committees with the number of people that are there, but because it has been copy pasted, you have had no understanding of what where that organization is. Therefore you have made just copy pasted a policy which is not implementable, and the donors will not take much time to understand, because they will not find the actual implementation of the policy, and that will actually be a red flag. In fact, it will give you negative marking. So your purpose of the policy is not served. Your intention of making that as a checkbox for due diligence, that is also not served. So every ways you are in a lose-lose situation if you do not look at organization policies as a tailor-made document. Now next thing is policies help in risk management because they are a tool of internal control. Therefore they manage risk because they tell you this is the framework within which you have to work. We will do risk and controls in the next session only, so that then from here you will be able to understand the two aspects of organization. One is risk and the other aspect is control, and how do all this work that we are doing is actually bringing about mitigation or management of risk. At the end of the day, we have to save the organization from getting into a risk area which can cause very big harm, or which can even cause existential risk to our organization. Now, as far as policies are concerned, there are two policies which are statutory policies, and all the others are policies which will depend upon your need for policy. Number one, as per the as based on the stage at which you are, and number two, the need for policy is also based on The complexity of the policy or the coverage of the policy is also dependent on the size and stage that you are today and maybe for the next 2 3 years. Now, as far as the statutory policy is concerned, this is the posh policy, which is based on the 2013 act on sexual harassment of women at workplace. So this is a policy irrespective of your size. This posh policy is a statutory policy, and this is something that is required by donors when they are doing your due diligence. Now, again, how complex the posh policy has to be will depend on your size. So if you do not have more than 10 people, for instance, you may not be mandated to have an internal complaints committee, because that's the minimum number of employees that need to be there. So what I'm saying is, well, you need to have a posh policy, which is a mandatory requirement if you are an organization. The second one is a child protection policy. If you are directly or indirectly working with children. Now, these are two statutory policies that need to be created as per law. Now, as far as other policies are concerned, and the number of policies and the coverage of policies and the complexity of the policy will depend again on your current status and your understanding where your organization is going in the next 2 3 years. The finance and admin policy is one of the key policies. The HR policy is another policy, which is a key policy. The diversity, equity, and inclusion policy becomes part of your HR policy, basically, most of the time. Then you have the code of conduct, which is also part of your HR policy. Conflict of interest is a separate policy. So if you were to look at the DE and I and code of conduct and ethics, it can be subsumed into your HR policy. In your admin and finance policy, your procurement policy can go. Now, I see very small organizations having a separate procurement policy. So the best thing is to have a policy which is which actually is taking care of many areas in the same policy document. So procurement can be part of finance, admin can be part of finance, okay? But the conflict of interest is a different kind of a policy. The risk management policy is a different policy. The IT, data backup, and privacy can be part of the finance and admin policy. Whistleblower can be part of the HR policy. Anti-bribery and corruption, ABC policy, can be part of lobbying, can be part of HR. So if you see that there are broadly 3 4 types of policies that can be formulated by organizations. One, of course, the finance and admin policy. Now, what is the coverage of this policy, or what areas get covered, is what we are going to see. And then you can have the HR policy, you can have the conflict of interest policy, and you can have a risk management policy. Now, if you have these 4 policies and your coverage is proper, I think these are the 4 documents. Instead of having a separate travel policy, a separate procurement policy, I don't think that's required. It will all, even if it's a big organization, we can subsume policies into one document so that it becomes easier for employees to actually see. Now, what are the key aspects, therefore, as per our discussion? Just that the point relating to organizational policies, they have to be formal and written. Why? Because they have to talk the same language to everybody, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, everybody, and they have to be formal. Means they need they it's not as though it is the discretion of anybody to follow or not follow. And the writing will mean that there will be common understanding. Otherwise, if they were verbal, probably people will understand it differently. So the written part is also very important. Written part means the language in which in the way it has been written, how clear these policies have been, clearly these policies have been articulated and formulated, is very very important. Only then compliance will happen. So if it's written in simple language which every employee from top to the bottom can understand, I think that will make more sense in terms of of this policy. It is a written document, but the comprehension of that document is also very important. Then the purpose, what for is it done, what for is this policy? If it's a finance policy, what is the intention of having this policy? If it's an HR policy, if it's a conflict of interest policy, what is the purpose for having this policy? The next one is, it's meant for employees. Now, generally, policies are meant for employees. Now, it's an internal guideline. However, when we talk of policies, we also talk of these policies being shared with our auditors. Okay. Why? Because the auditors need to see whether the internal control framework is being implemented or not. Now, we all have understood that policies are specific to organization. They are not standard documents. They are specific to ABC organization, DEF organization. They are all specific. So when an external person like an auditor comes, one wants to understand whether the employees have actually followed the policy or not and taken decision based on the policy, that will also be shared with the auditors. But however, primarily consumers or target audience for the policies are employees, because the employees are running the organization, and we need to have an internal framework for that. The next one is operational procedures. So we'll need to understand what's the difference between a policy and a procedure. But operational procedures means step by step, defining step by step the various tasks to be performed. So you have the policy broken down into procedures. So the policy comes first, the policy purpose comes first, and whatever is the purpose of the policy is then to be operationalized, and the operationalization part is what is called as procedures. Next is legal compliance, very important, because if there is a policy, it will also bring in the fact that this is the legal compliance. So for instance, if we have to do any area of finance, like reporting, like financial statements, then what is the legal compliance or legal provision? Is there a legal framework? We have seen when we were talking about presentation of audited financial statements. So what is the legal provision relating to that? What is the legal provision in terms of filing of income tax returns? What is the legal provision in terms of hiring? Okay. What is the legal provision in, harassment at workplace? Now, those legal provisions have also to be brought into the policy, so that statutory and regulatory compliances as well as the operational procedures that we want people to follow, they are both married into a single kind of a document, so that you are not only ensuring internal. You remember the first objective of our that we stated, one is internal controls and second is statutory compliance. So the policy normally marries both of them together. It's a tool of risk management, which we have already seen. Communication is key. They need to give the same standard understanding to everybody. That is what I'm saying. And they need to be consistently followed. So if X has to follow, Y also has to follow. You have to be fair to both of them. And the extent to which the policy and procedure has to be followed, if it is being followed by one, second, third, every person, then that is consistent. Okay. So that is the other aspect related to organizational policies. So these are some of the key aspects which a policy has to have, so that the implementation of that policy can be done. Now, each of these words has meaning. It is very important for you to understand each of these words, because then only we will be able to understand, ensure that there is common communication, employee directed, consistency in terms of policy implementation, legal provisions being covered, procedures being spelled out in such a fashion that they can be easily carried out. The procedures are tasks, so they need to be carried out for ensuring that the policy has been followed. Now, the need for policy is basically, as I said, it's a control tool. It tells all resources how to operate. So it tells HR, it tells admin, it tells program. That's the control part of the tool. So policies are guidelines for internal control, and the internal control will act as a risk management tool. So the internal controls will bring about reduction in risk, is what I'm trying to say. At the end of the day, we have to protect the organization, and that's and achieve the organization mission. So both of them are some things for which you need control. Now, Efficiently and effective utilization of resources will be ensured if you have internal controls, or these policies. It's a training resource. So everybody is actually said, everybody is told or taught that this has to be consistently understood. The next one is it's a framework for reference by employees. So if there is a question as to what has to be done in terms of procedure, say for instance, when it comes to procurement, now should I follow this particular step or that particular step at this stage? Go back to the procedure on procurement process, and you will then find step by step. First step, get technical specification. Second step, get the requisition with budget approvals. Third is for constituting a committee. Fourth is to invite bids. Now at every stage there is a kind of a task or a step by step direction that is being provided, and that's what is the framework for reference. If you are in doubt, please go to the policy and refer to that policy, is what actually there is an this the policy ensures completeness and accuracy of transactions. So if you have done procurement, then we had seen the procurement life cycle, if you remember the procurement cycle actually, or the process. And then we had seen from X to Z or Y or Z, the entire process has to be followed. People might be different at each stage in the process, but we have to complete the transaction. So the completeness of the transaction and the accuracy of the transaction is ensured when we have a policy framework. Now it provides accurate and reliable reports because like HR, like accounting, like budgeting, all of those have policies so that your reporting is also proper. Like donor management, your donor reports, how do you prepare the donor reports as part of the donor management policy in the finance policy. Now that will ensure that your reports, your outputs after the transaction has been done is reliable and accurate. So, it's not just control, but it is also helping you in your day-to-day work and as a reference whenever there is a doubt. Now, doubt can be to for any person, but once they refer to this framework, their doubt will be over because they know that all of them have to consistently follow that policy. There are provisions for action if you do not follow the policy. Okay, so that is uh, moving on to policy versus procedure as we were discussing, and this is the part where I actually want you to understand what is the difference between the two, because at times we do not understand the difference between the two. A policy is the why behind an action. So you have a finance policy. Why that finance policy? Because we want to the why and the what is the policy. We want to have internal control on the finance of our organization. Now that is what is the policy, and therefore the purpose will be stated. Now, as far as the purpose of the policy will be stated, within the finance policy is what will come as the procedure. Now, the procedure is nothing but the how of the policy, how the tasks will be carried out step by step. Now, that the practical steps that have to be done to achieve the policy goals. So within, suppose the procurement policy, that is the procurement policy. What does it say? We need to have the why of the procurement policies. We need to have economy, efficiency, and effectiveness in procurement. Now, for that, there is the procedures. So you'll have procedures in terms of procurement methods. You'll have procedures in terms of the procurement process. You'll have procedures in terms of exception to policy. Now, those are the various steps or the how of the policy that need to be followed if the purpose of the procurement policy has to be achieved. That's what it is. It provides a step-by-step instruction in terms of how to as a guide to follow. Uh, Now, the procedures have to be detailed in such a fashion that everybody understands them and follows them consistently. That is what is important. And the way they are written is also very, very important, because everybody must have to understand that communication of that particular procedure as equally. And then only there will be no difference in terms of understanding and action. Okay. This is a timetable for processing transaction. So it says Well, you have got your bids now. The next step is to to convene a procurement committee meeting. Once the decision has been made, then you'll have to this the timetable says you'll have to place order on the vendor who has been selected. So all those things are given in a step by step manner in the procurement policy. So, as I said, finance policy is a policy, but how to record accounting transactions, how to do banking, how to do expenses, that is the procedure. So, you would then now understand the difference between policy and procedure. Now, who formulates policies is also something very important to understand. Policies are formulated by management but approved by the governing body of your organization. As I said, governance, these are policies are governance tools also, because the governance tools, how as governance tools, because the governing body or the top uh, body of your organization who's supposed to save your organization, because they have a fiduciary responsibility to the organization, a responsibility of trust, they are the ones who have to ensure that these policies are there. So the responsibility is with the governing body to formulate and approve policy. Now, while formulation means that the management will formulate the policy, but the approval and authorization of the policy will always rest with the governing body. It's not with the management. So whenever you see policies, you'll say this policy is effective from this date after approval of the policy document by the board of directors or the governing body. Now, the governing body may have a subcommittee of the governing body in terms of saying, well, this needs to be formulated by the subcommittee which has subject matter specialists, because you'll if it's a HR policy, you might have some people in your governing body who are HR specialists or have had experience. They may be assigned the responsibility of you know both formulating as well as reviewing the policy and sending it to the governing body for approval. So that's how the policies are formulated in organizations. So it's not as though you can formulate as a CEO the policy. No, the policy has to be that can be formulated by a subcommittee, that can be formulated by your functional head, that can be formulated by you, but then it has to be finally approved by the governing body. Similar, as I said, since it's a dynamic document, since a policy is a dynamic document, therefore the policy will have to go to the governing body for approval, number one, and any revision because of the policy being dynamic or modification of policy being dynamic for addition of provisions or addition of aspects as the organization has grown, or for any deletion because of the statutory compliance is no longer applicable, or because of the fact that that procedure has difficulty in implementation, all that has to go to the modification has to be approved by the governing body, and then only it will be considered as applicable. So please remember that the policies that are formulated are to be approved by the governing body, uh, and then it will be implemented. But once the policies have been formulated, then who implements the policies? The functional head. So if it's a finance policy, it's the role of the head of finance. If it's an HR policy, it's the role of the HR person who's heading that, to ensure that the policies are implemented. Because there has to be somebody who has to say, well, these policies are being implemented or not. In certain cases, like policies on risk management and conflict of interest, as we had seen, those policies are implemented are the responsibility of the chief executive. So, and the policies and procedures are applicable throughout the organization without any exception. That is one thing that has to be uh, understood. However, the policyholders can, review policies and consider revisions, updations, modifications, as I had mentioned, and through the chief executive, it will go to the governing body for approval. Now, I come to the one key policy, which is the finance policy that an organization has. So, we were talking of policies, and finance policy is what we are looking at. Now, I said that generally, if current in the current scenario, if you have an all-inclusive finance policy, which includes admin, and the finance policy that I mean, the finance policy uh, discussion that we are having right now, does include admin. Okay, so we will say office management, procurement, normal hygiene, opening, closing, all that is really admin. Fixed assets is admin, inventory is admin. Let's understand the difference between finance and admin. Sometimes we talk about that. So the finance function is the accounts and the finance function. And then there are a lot of functions which are part of the finance department, which is, procurement, which is office management, which is front desk management, which is inventory, which is fixed asset, okay, which is receiving and communicate correspondence, or information technology. If there is no separate department for information technology within the finance function, then you will find that all these aspects which are related, which are important for the organization, is resting with the admin department. And the admin department may be part of the finance department, and sometimes both finance and admin may be called as finance operations. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to tell you. And the finance policy that we are looking here is exactly covering both finance and admin. So you can have the finance and admin policy as one policy. You can have the HR policy, which will have all issues relating to code of conduct, ethics, and all that, so that it's an all-inclusive policy, diversity, equity, and inclusion. All that is made part of it. And then you can have a conflict of interest policy, which we will see in some detail. And the last is risk management policy. Of course, we are not going to see risk management policy in this section, but when we will do risks and controls in the next session, we will understand how a risk management policy looks like. Generally, donors are looking at these policies, and I have already told you the two statutory policies that have to be there is the POSH policy, which can be made as part of your HR policy if you want, and the child protection policy, which also can be made part of your HR policy. So if all of them were to be combined, I think there are four policies in which all policies can get subsumed instead of having different policies. Okay, because then those policies can be handled as a single handbook, and will cover all aspects of your organization. Now, coming to the finance policy, these are the contents. Okay, you can have a look at that. And now we are moving on to understanding each of them. Now, the first one is what is called as authorization matrix. What authorization matrix means is, what is, if I am working in a particular position in the organization, what is my uh, financial power? What is my financial power? What is the authorization that I can do in terms of finances? Now that is put in the form of an authorization matrix as part of the finance policy. The authorization matrix will say this level of persons will have this much power to incur expenditure for this much amount. The threshold value will be what is which what will be given. Then at lower levels, that authorization can be delegated to other people. So you have the director or you have the chief functionary having authorization up to a certain amount, but below that amount can be given to the manager or to the deputy manager or to the executive, whatever it is. So for each of the threshold of expenses, there is an authorization matrix, just as we had seen the procurement policy. If you have a procurement policy for 5 lakhs, then this particular level of person only can approve that procurement. Similarly for expenditure, similarly for banking. So in each area of the function, that is the finance function, what is the delegation and authorization that is available to you is specified in the authorization matrix. Now, nobody can cross that authorization matrix unless that person is not available and that work has been delegated to somebody else, because that authority is not available. So you will find the most important part of the finance policy is what is the authority matrix or authorization matrix, whatever you might call it. This is the original authority to take various decisions, and nobody can get into the other person's authority, because that authorization matrix, or the step by step, is something that is explained in the authority matrix. Now, what it means for people like you, It means who will approve the expense, who will approve the procurement, and who has the authority to approve the various transactions. Now, it is likely that some expenditure comes for 5 lakhs, you might not have the authority. You cannot approve that. You will have to send it to the next higher level. Okay. And then if that also doesn't have that authority, then to the next higher author. Now, what does authorization matrix do? One, it lays down the ceiling beyond which you cannot go, because the organization thinks this person is better able to handle beyond a particular threshold, and this particular person can handle up to a threshold. The second thing is it also acts as a check and balance, because at different levels you have authorization matrix authorities. They will each at the next higher stage understand what needs to be checked. So the checks and balances, the segregation, the delegation, and the authorization is something that is ensured through the authorization metric. Very, very important part of the finance policy. Now, if you do not, now just imagine if you are working in the organization at whatever level, if you really do not know what is your authority level, you may not have an authority level at all if you are too junior in the organization. It'll all depend on how the organization hierarchy is, how positions are, and based on those positions and responsibilities for those positions, the authority matrix will be there. But if you really do not know whether you can pass an expense, whether you can approve an expense, whether you can sign a particular check, whether you can sign a particular contract or purchase order, how will you conduct your duties? Because we know that all these things may have to be done by you as a person working in the field. You might be actually signing vouchers, you might be signing off checks, you might be actually signing off contracts and procurement, you might be signing off HR contracts. But are you authorized to sign or not is what is specified in the authorization metrics. Now, next comes to accounting. Now, this is a work which, as I had told you in the first session, is something that the account specialists are doing. So you're not supposed to know a lot of things in terms of, uh, how the process of accounting happens, but basically you must know what is the chart of account. Why? Because the budget will decide the budget activities that have to be done will have to be part of the chart of accounts. Okay. And the accounting codes, the cost center, the project code, all that is something that you will need to do. But the flow of accounting process may be something with that the accountants will do. But do you need to know the chart of accounts? Because yes, because when you are actually incurring an expenditure, you must know in the chart of account which is the code to which this particular transaction or expenditure has to be uh, assigned. And based on that code, the accounting software or tally will record it in that particular code, and that code is linked to the budget. So then only the budget variance report that we were talking about will be accurate. Otherwise, if we are not assigning a particular code, then the expenditure might be actually accounted for in tally in other heads, and you will never get a right variance report and financial report. So it's very important that at the source you are able to identify which code, accounting code in the chart, matching with the budget is what you need to be very mindful of. Otherwise, there'll be mistakes. Otherwise, there'll be a fight between you and the finance people, because they will then continuously say that every time the reporting in terms of the transaction, you are not inputting the transaction in software, but you are telling the accounting people this is the code to for which this expenditure has been incurred. Please assign it to that code. And once you assign it to that code, that is the actual expenditure versus the budget which has also been set up in the system for that accounting code. Only then you will get a genuinely correct variance report, okay, which can be relied upon for decision making. The flow of accounting process may be in terms of vouchers, in terms of verification, in terms of record keeping. That's not something that you need to be very savvy, because that's something that the accounting people will do. Okay. The method of accounting, that's something that account people do. The cash and the accrual basis of accounting, you have already seen that. Then the books of accounts. What are the books of accounts that have to be maintained? The accounts folks know how much period, what form, which place, all that is for the accounting people to ensure, because they are holding the papers. Please remember, you have done the expenditure and your responsibility is over. These accounting people, as per law, will have to hold the papers up to a period of 11 years as per law. Okay. So documentation, the period of record retention is something with accounts, but you want to understand that this, that while the transaction has been done by you, somebody has to hold that transaction, somebody has to explain the transaction to external authorities, somebody has to explain the transaction to donors. Now, if at the source, when the transaction occurred, who does the transaction? The transaction is done by program people. If at the source the transaction is correct and is correctly communicated, correctly recorded, only then the transaction will be correctly reported. That's what is important. Now, reconciliation and closing, again, something that is there with the accounts people. They will close it, they will reconcile and say, this much was our budget, this much was the grant that I got, this much was spent, this is the advance, and this is the current closing grant that I have. The accounts people, so that you can see how much grant remains. The final accounts and reporting, again with accounting. But we had seen that the financial reports, or the final reports, the balance sheet, the PN, the IND, and the RNP are some things that we will get from the accounts and finance team, but we will need to understand that so that we can communicate those reports and our financial health and position to the external world. So while certain places we will have to, because if we are heading locations, field locations, program locations, we will have to have that understanding. And you will now see that between accounting people and you as programmers, or your juniors, there has to be some understanding. Otherwise, the transactions will, the consistency in terms of your understanding of the transaction, the way it is recorded and the way it is summarized and reported, that difference will be there, which will come up after 6 months, 12 months, and we will be all sitting and fighting with each other. So that is the reason why you need to also understand. But you are not an accounting person, you are not doing the accounts, you're not doing the credit debit, you're not doing the dual aspect. That we know there is a dual aspect, everything that, and the dual aspect is, the dual aspect is for our personal finance also. If you spend out money something, then you will actually buy it. If you don't buy it, if you don't incur an expenditure, there will be no money that will flow out. So that's the dual aspect. Very simply, whenever there is a confusion in terms of understanding organizational basics of finance, just apply that same example to yourself, in terms of how to understand, because all personal finance and organizational finance are parallel or related, very very related. That is what I'm trying to say. So once you understand your personal finance and apply it to organizational finance, it will be easier to understand the reason why it has been done. The next one is payments and advances. So accounting basically is recording, but payments and advances means physical payment. Okay, so you are recording expenditure in books, but you have not paid it out. So various types of payments that we make, how are those payments made? And that's the accrual basis. Accrual means first you have to accrue that expenditure, and then you will have to pay. In the cash basis of accounting, payment was the only transaction that used to happen. But in accrual basis, first you have to recognize the transaction, and then you have to pay the transaction. That is why it is called accrual. But the second step in the accrual process is the payment. Now, the types of payments could be vendor payment, employee payment, consultant payment, works payment. Okay, we have all seen that, because when we saw resources, where the resources of organization are used, they are used all over here only. So what is the approval metrics for payments? Okay, it will be more or less, what is the timeline for payment, should the payment be made as per the purchase order. So all that is something that we will need to know, because if we are also into the payment business, and many program people are actually signatories. So when they are making payment, they have to see all these things, that the payment is being made properly. Second is advances. So the advance can be for travel, for program, for for personnel. Okay, it might be a salary advance or whatever advance. So what are the eligibility for advances that the policy will say, and how advances will be settled is also something that the policy document will say. Now, why do we need to know this on the right hand side? Okay, is because we should know what is our authorization limit. Are we doing the authorization properly? Is the expenditure properly approved before we are making the payment? Are the advances that we are sanctioning from the field? Suppose that somebody is asking for a salary advance. Now, what is the salary advance policy? Okay, so if the salary advance policy is saying something and the person is sending the as for salary advance and you are just blindly signing and sending it up to HR and finance for giving them salary advance, then there'll be a lot of confusion because people will come back to you and say, well, this is not as per salary advance policy, and a lot of our time has been wasted. So what I'm actually saying is that you need to know what are the policies related to advance. If travel advance is to be given, what is the advance provision in the travel policy? Okay, if program advances has to be made, what for is the program advances to be made? So that is something that you, before you approve that for being made, for advances to be made. The next is budgeting, and I'm not going to devote much time. We have done a full portion on budget. So what is the process of budgeting? What is budget variance? What is budgetary control? How different types of budgets have to be prepared? Who is supposed to approve those budgets? Okay. What is this common cost? We had talked about the direct cost and the common cost. What is the common cost policy? We had talked about common cost policy so that we can tell the donor our shared costs have been allocated on the basis of this principle of the policy. So if there is any change in the budget that has to be done after the award has been given, why? Because in the budget variance report, we will find that the estimates and actuals are varying, and therefore we might want to have may at the budget after the monitoring, that is the budget variance report, the budgetary control is the action point in terms of amendment. We have seen that. Now, who suggests all this? And who is involved in all this is the finance people. So we must know whether this expense can be budgeted, is a budgeted expense or not. Sometimes as programmers, since we do not know the budget, we might incur expenditure which is not part of the budget, and it's an unbudgeted expenditure which the organization might have to pay from its own free resources, or what we call as general reserves, which was not required to be done in the field at all. So all those things is something that we also need to know. When will we make a requisition for expenditure? Okay, what is the process of budgeting? How are we holding the budget? Okay, this will help you to implement the budget in the way it has been formulated. Okay, so I am not getting too much into this because we have done the section on budgeting. Now, fund flow, budget is an estimation. Okay, we had seen the role of finance, that is budgeting, and we had seen the role of finance as fund flow. Budgeting is an estimation of income and expenditure. How much income we will get, how much expenditure we will get. But a fund flow shows what is the amount of money that has fund that has come and how much amount of fund has gone out. It's not an estimation, it is an actual. So sometimes you might have an estimation of fund flow and you might have an estimation of uh, 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 fund flow, and you may have an actual fund flow. The actual fund flow is nothing but the receipt and payment statement in your audited financial statement. You remember we had seen audited financial statements, and three principal financial statements were balance sheet, which tells your assets and liabilities, income and expenditure, which tells you your income and expenditure, and the third one was the receipt and payment, which tells you how much fund came and how much fund went. Okay. In the income and expenditure, you might have some income which has not come. You might have some expenditure which has not actually been paid. But the receipt and payment or the fund flow statement actually talks about this, how you will have to make fund flow projections. How will you make monthly fund flow projections for your projects? How will those projections go to the finance team? How will you get your operating cash budgets every month? Is something, that you do. You must be making requisition for funds every month at your location. So that's basically the fund flow. And you will have to be mindful how much is the fund that your cost center or your project location is carrying as at the end of the month. If you don't know that, then you will not have a figure for the opening balance in the next year, next month. And how will you make that requisition? So basically, fund flow is your routine, regular money that should be available for you for spending. That is the fund flow part. Now, the income side of the fund flow is something that the head office or your principal office will be looking at, because that shows how much of the income in the budget has actually come. Generally, field locations are not responsible for getting direct monies from the donors. So the fund inflow is something that rests uh, with the principal office, whereas the fund outflow is something that you will have to share every month through a fund requisition. That's what is the fund flow. Now, the fund flow generally is historical or past, and also can be fund requisition based on your projections or forecast. Okay. The next one is investment banking and treasury. Investment basically means that if you have surplus money in your organization, how will that money be invested? Or if you get corpus, how will that be invested? Will it be invested in fixed deposits? Can it be invested in shares? Can it be invested in mutual funds? What is our investment policy going to be? And what is our investment register going to be? All that is something that you need to understand. As you go up in the hierarchy, you will be an equal part in taking decisions about investment of resources, like corpus, like unutilized grants or long term grants that you have got for the next couple of years, that will be invested. Now, that investment must fetch us the maximum rate of interest, is why the investment policy. But maximum rate of interest, but without taking undue risk. So the risk return has to be balanced, and that is what is included in the investment policy. Banking, you would all know how will we bank, where will we open our account, how many signatories will be there. I know many organizations have just one signatory. That is very poor internal control, because you are giving unlimited power to only one person. So generally, dual signatories should be what should be preferred. Online banking or net banking should be preferred, but it should be implemented in the spirit of net banking. Okay, how will signatories be changed? If there are is the governing body members part of the signatories? All those. How will reconciliations happen as far as bank is concerned? Okay, if there is a change in the bank signatories, how will we actually report it to the statutory authorities? Okay. Bank reconciliation, as I had said, that's the work of the accounting people. Bank reconciliation means whatever checks we issued, have they been actually paid out, or are there some checks which have not been paid out, which we should know, and therefore pursue the vendor to see that he gets it he encashes it. So that is what is called as bank reconciliation. The reconciliation between the bank account and the bank position in our books is what is called as bank reconciliation. Very simple. Okay. Opening, closing of bank account, changes in bank signatories, all that. Now, the opening and closing of the bank where you will have is what is written in the rules and regulations. Some of the older organizations, the rule and regulations still say you will have banking with the nationalized bank, which is not required. So you will have to make those changes in your rules and regulations to say that instead of nationalized bank, we will have it in scheduled commercial banks, and so on and so forth. So all that is what is banking. Now, what is treasury management? Treasury management is whatever available funds that you have, how best you will utilize. If you have short term money available, which might not be utilizable in the next 6 months because of your fund flow not demanding that money, then that is treasury management. Can you put it in short term deposits? Can you put it in some kind of a liquid fund, which will give you 7, 8, 9%? And that 9% will be the additional money that will be available to you. That's what is called treasury. Now, treasury management generally is a banking word, which basically the for the banks, treasury management is how best to get uh, income from, because the bank gets the money from the lenders and it has to give it to the borrowers. Now, how does the bank operate in such a way to get maximum income from that borrowing and lending activity? So, how efficiently you are managing your resources? Are you just allowing them to sit in your savings bank earning 2.5%? Or if they are not required for the next couple of years, a couple of months, or maybe 6 months or 9 months, are you looking at other ways where you can increase your revenue or your interest income? That's what is treasury management. That is efficiency. So basically, treasury management is more short term, investment management is more long term, and banking is the procedure for making the resources available to you, okay, or to the vendor or to the employees. Because somehow or the other, the financial resources that we have got have to be allocated or distributed. Now, there has to be a mechanism. The mechanism in the country is banking. Okay, so that is what it is. Donor management, again, understanding the donors, protocols for donor engagement, uh, what is the reporting requirement, how compliances have to be done under the grant contract. So can you have a compliance checklist every time that you get a donor contract? Read the donor contract and make a checklist which will say these are the terms and conditions of this donor contract. And you remember we had done general terms and operational terms of a donor contract. You can refer to that and read the grant contract and make a checklist, paste it on the file which contains this, so that you know these are the terms, because all donor contracts are different. Okay, so what is the donor reporting requirement? What is the grant closeout requirement? Okay, what is how communication has to be done with the donor? All those aspects will be taken care of. Will the donor communication be done only by the CEO or by the fundraising team or by programmers of up to a certain level? All that is something that is done, because this procedure or in the donor management policy helps to ensure that we are dealing with the donors in the way we this organization should be dealing. Okay, and we are also meeting our commitment, building credibility, so that we get donor grants additionally as a re-grant or maybe new grants from new donors. The procurement is something that I have done, so we are not going to do all this. Is the procurement process, that is the cycle, the category of procurement being works, HR, goods, fixed assets. The methods of procurement we had seen, okay, over the counter, uh, yeah, limited bidding, open bidding, all right, that those we had seen based on the threshold applicable for procurement. Sole sourcing, if there is only one vendor who can provide that service. E-procurement, when you do online procurement. Vendor management, we had talked about, because we need to have an understand a good vendor, strategic. We'll have to be strategic about vendor selection. Okay, so vendor selection, because we have to get the best value for money, lease of offices, all that will be part of procurement. Then you have travel policy. Okay, this is an important policy. So this policy will also have advance, travel approvals, how expenditure will have to be reported. What are the various components of travel? So you will have travel, you will have accommodation, you will have per diem. Then what are the entitlements? Again, it will be based mostly on the authorization metrics. The higher the person in the metric, the higher the entitlement. So sometimes there is no difference between people. So I'm not commenting on whether which one is good, but you have to. Why do we need travel policy? Again, because people who are traveling for projects, those people should commonly consistently know what their entitlement is. It's not that some person stays in a two-star hotel, somebody stays in a five-star hotel. No, for that particular level, what is the entitlement is being fixed. It could be a range, it could be a maximum amount beyond which you cannot go. So that will ensure that your budgeting is proper, your compliance of travel will be proper, because everybody will understand the same language as is stated in the travel policy. What are your per diem entitlements? What about travel insurance? What about safety security? Okay, what about local conveyance? All those things will be explained to everybody in the same fashion. So somebody who's down in the field as a foot soldier, somebody who's sitting at the strategic level, all of them will understand and will have follow the same kind of entitlements, the same entitlements that are applicable for that level. Very, very important to understand this. So who approves? Again, the approval of travel based on authorization metrics. So the authorized authority metrics will guide a lot of decisions in terms of what, who can approve what, especially travel policy, especially procurement policy. That will all be related to the approval metrics or the authority metrics that we had seen as the first point. Now, as program people, first of all, for your own travel you should know. Second is, for before approving the travel of your subordinates or your reports, that also is important that you understand what their travel entitlements are, because then the approval will be correct. Otherwise finance people will keep sending it back to you, back and forth hoga, and then you will not be able to get the travel claims settled and paid out in time. Then your subordinate is going to actually create a problem. So there, in order to ensure that the travel entitlements, not your but your subordinates and your team, is properly settled in time, and there is no back and forth, you will have to ensure that that particular policy is understood by you for different levels of your employee, of your subordinates. Then you have the fixed asset and inventory policy. We have already seen what is fixed asset and inventory. You remember when we were actually doing the session on procurement. Now, now you know what is fixed asset, what is program assets, program supplies. We had seen anything which has a life of more than 1 year is something which is in the nature of capital asset, which does not get consumed and generally has a value of more than 5,000 rupees. Where other, if that is not the case, then it can all be clubbed into program supplies or inventories. So all aspects relating to how purchases, recording, issue, reporting, if there is, something which is lost, something which has lost value, something where the condition of that asset or condition of that inventory has actually deteriorated, how will we deal with all that? Is transfer of assets, issue of asset, return of assets. It's very important for program people also, because their subordinates are getting all these assets, or their subordinates might actually be getting and using all the program supplies. How does it get settled? Because otherwise it will keep showing up as issued to your team. How does that need to be maintained? How will you ensure that the IT equipment, digital assets that you have, furniture and fixture, office supplies, are kept in good condition? So those provisions are laid down in the fixed asset and inventory policy. The information technology and management policy, IT policy, basically is also now looking at cyber security and personal digital data protection. Okay, so those are two new things. So IT equipment, in terms of backups, in terms of data management, because if it gets lost, you saw information technology risk is there. Okay, so how about office emails? How, what is can be allowed? How will you archive data? What is password management? You will have to work out with the IT department for your field location in terms of ensuring that all this is done. Otherwise, when there's an IT audit, then you will find that a lot of non-compliance will be reported. So that is something that is there. Cyber security means that because of cyber crimes, can there be a risk to your digital assets or your information, to your MIS, to your banking? All those are cyber security. So you'll have to have proper firewalls and passwords so that that cannot be cracked. The next one, which is becoming very important and that you should know, is the personal data protection and digital personal data protection. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act has been made in 2023, which says that if you are having personal data of employees digitally, then how that data has to be used and consent has to be obtained for using that data is something that is important. Now, for programmers, this is very, very important because sometimes when you do programming, you will have personal data of beneficiaries. So, how will you ensure that you have a policy for personal data protection compliance under the DPDP Act? Okay, uh, under the DPDP Act of 2023. Still, it is rules are being framed. It is in the process of getting notified, but the very key factor will be for programmers is personal data that you have. Can it be shared or can it not be shared? Can it be shared with consent? Do you have specific persons who will decide whether this can be shared? So that policy has to be framed. It is very important for the program people. So that's the IT part. Petty cash is something where if you cannot make banking payment, although banking payment should be insisted, universal banking is already there in this country. However, for very small payments and that have to be made for office functioning, and it will be defined as to what is petty cash expenses in the policy. That policy will decide how much petty cash you can have, what expenses can be paid from petty cash, what will be the procedure, who will hold the petty cash, what will be the verification, what will be the replenishment, all that provision will be there. Now, since you are heading the office or you are in that position where you have to actually look at uh, uh, meeting small, meager, petty expenses, first you need to know what are they and what are the expenses that can be paid only through check, who will hold that, what will be the authority, how after how much expenditure can the replenishment happen, so that the operations are not affected, and you also know what are the ceilings or limits. These are rules and procedures, as we know. Next is audit and assurance. Again, your role in audit and assurance. What is it that you need to know about various types of audits? How will you respond to audits? Sometimes we don't like to, engage in audit. We say that this is the work of the finance people. Yes, the finance people are the ones who are organizing, coordinating the audit. But when the auditors have specific programmatic or on ground related or understanding the nuances for that particular expenditure, it's for you to be able to tell them. Now, that is what is the audit and assurance policy, the various types of audit, and we will see this as a full section. Statutory compliance, last session we have already done. So, what are the registrations that we have to have? And after we have got the various types of registration, now the registration might keep on changing. Say, for instance, if you do not have more than 20 people today in your organization as employee, you are not required to actually register under EPF. But suppose after 1 year you have 25 people, then you will have to include the EPF registration provision and compliance provision in your policy. So that is why I say that the policies are dynamic documents. Now, all the provisions in law which have to be followed in terms of registration of your organization and periodic compliances for those registrations. So if you have an income tax registration under 12A, then you will have to file your audit report. You will have to file your ITR. You will have to file your 9A and 10 if there is a surplus. We saw that last time. 85% we couldn't spend, then we can carry it forward for 5 years, or we can deem it as application for the next year. If we are getting donations, are we filing the form 10BD, which is the statement of donation? So at locations, if you are doing fund mobilization, then for to the donors, have we got the right kind of information so that the form 10BD or the statement of donation can be filed on time? The EPF compliances, ESI compliances. If we have more than 20 people, is there gratuity provision being complied with? All that. Now, please remember, in certain cases, law is applicable without a registration. Without a registration. So, for gratuity, you do not need registration. However, for EPF, you need registration. ESI, you need registration. Professional tax, you need registration. For Maternity Benefit Act, don't need any registration. For Minimum Wages Act, you don't need any registration. So when it comes to a situation where you have more than 10 employees, the Gratuity Act will be applicable, but it will not be based on any registration. The compliance is not linked to registration, but the compliance is linked to crossing a threshold of a number of employees. So many organizations, small, come to us and say, well, we thought we will have to register under gratuity and then gratuity will be applicable. So please remember, registration may not be the only consideration for several compliances. And this, so one is registration, second is what is called compliance or reporting compliance. After you are registered, in so for instance, you are registered on an income tax, you have to do compliances in terms of ITR, in terms of audit report, in terms of 10BD form, in terms of TDS. If you are registered under FCRA, you have to do FC4. We had seen the annual return. Any changes that you make, you have to intimate and get approval. That is what is called compliance. Okay, so there is a distinction between registration related compliance and reporting compliance. That's what I want to make you understand. So in all of this, we might be somewhere or the other, especially if we are up the line. Second thing is, we must know all this because our juniors or our subordinates will keep asking some question or the other. क्या मेरा PF time, is it being deposited on time? Is gratuity being provision for gratuity being made for me? Okay, all that is my TDS deducted properly. But if you don't know what is all these provisions at all as project in charges or as field in charges, you will continuously talk to the finance people and they will keep getting irritated. So it's not very important to very difficult to understand that. Risk management, we will do something as a session next time. But risk management can also be made part of our finance policy, or it can be made as a separate policy. Risk management policy is becoming an increasingly important document and method of to counter risk, various provision risk for the organization, because donors are very very scared of risks affecting the organization's ability to deliver and utilize resources. The resources are coming from the donors, so ultimately they are very very concerned that those resources are as per law, as per internal procedures, and without affecting the ability of that NGO or organization to deliver, is something for which they want to understand the amount of risk that an organization is exposed to. And risk management policy is also a dynamic document. So at different points of time, different risks will, and you will encounter different risks in that organization, and therefore the risk management process is a dynamic process within this policy. It's not that you have made the policy and that's about it. Have you done the procedure for understanding and mitigating or managing risk or reducing risk, is the risk management. Sub grants is in case you have for your local grants. FC grants you cannot sub grant, but for local grants, if you have tied up or you have in your project proposal said that we will get this work done, this particular component of the entire project done by some other person, organization or NGO, which has the ability better than us, then that is sub grant. So what is the sub grant due diligence that you have done? What is the responsibility? What is the sub grant award? How will you monitor? All that will be sub granting. We had seen when we were talking about grants as prime recipient, sub award, and vendor, three categories, and they are all three different people. So here we are talking of sub granting, where uh, for local money, where you might want to onward transfer that a certain component of the activity, not the entire project, is where, how you will actually manage that sub grant. Now, office management, as I said, is basically admin part, opening, closing, front desk, receiving people, receiving correspondence, okay, official vehicle, logistics, travel related, office keys, all that office. Sometimes the admin people are also responsible for the day in IT related issues with some additional, or you may have an IT person dedicatedly for the IT equipment and IT highway. Now you must know who is responsible for what if you are heading an organization's office or field location or even the higher level office. So these are all the areas that I just wanted to mention are covered. They cover admin, they covered accounts, they covered financial aspects, and they can cover risk management. If you want, you can bring all of them together into one policy. They'll cover procurement, they'll cover travel, and that will be your admin and finance policy or manual. That will, that in case you want the risk management also to be covered. Then we come to the HR policy, and some of these aspects relating to HR are what I'm mentioning here. Now, please remember that when you have organization, then you need to have this policy so that the management of human resources, did did we have been all the time saying that even human resources is a resource, just like financial resource. So for the financial resource that we have spent on various things, capital goods, in program goods, all those things is part of the finance manual. But we are also procuring HR as a resource. I'm not meaning to say that procuring in the literal sense, but we are acquiring that talent of that resource, and that is also in a certain sense procurement. So how will we do that? And for that we are spending resources. We are spending financial resource for that HR resource. That is what I'm saying. So at the end of the day, all HR matters will also have financial implications, as you will see, in terms of benefits, compensation, in terms of advances. All that is financial. So what I'm saying is that you need to ensure that the financial resources are on the human resource, which is a big component of our total budget. I said for every project budget, close to about one third of the budget is basically human resources, because those are the people who are going to the community and delivering services. Now, those resources have to be acquired, and that has to be within a policy framework, which is the HR policy. Now, the HR policy has different components and the procedure for doing that. So, you know, and here I'm just wanting to say that at different levels in the hierarchy, the meaning of that policy is different. I mean, so you can read that. Uh, that's not very important. So the senior management will have to ensure implementation, efficiency and transparency. Efficiency means we are getting the human resources at the right cost, the right deliverable delivery, and transparency means see through. The middle level managers will have to ensure the smooth implementation. Okay, they don't have to, the senior people have to ensure that the implementation has been done as per policy, but the actual implementation will be done by managers, and the employees are the ones who need to understand what their rights and responsibilities are or duties are, and what are the provisions for various areas. Now we come to some of the areas that are included as part of the HR policy. Now if I want to say that at the end of the day, if an organization thinks it can summarize all policies into two, basically admin HR as one policy, and admin finance as one policy, and HR as another policy, all of them can be brought into one policy, two policy documents at the top level. And it is good to have lesser number of policy documents or manuals, so that just those two documents can be given, which will include everything. Sometimes we might have a risk management as a policy, as a separate policy, but we can include risk management policy as part of our finance policy. Sometimes procurement is different, sometimes travel is different, but then people have to run around to find out where that policy is. So good organizations, as best practices, should restrict their policy documents to just two. One is finance admin, and the second is HR. Now, in HR, what are the areas? So, recruitment, very clearly. What is the need analysis? The need analysis is based on whether the project has provision for that HR or not. Then you will have to requisition. So, who requisitions for recruitment? The person who's the supervisor, who wants that person to be there, placed for that particular project. What is the job description? What is the task that we want to get from them? Is the What is the budget that we have provided for that recruitment? Okay, what are the various channels for recruitment? Should we advertise? Should we do it through internal posting? Should we give it to a headhunting agency? It will all depend on what is the level of that particular person. Okay, or should we uh, get references from here and there? Should we put it that advertisement in various portals? Process for various types of recruitment. whether internal, external, or internal job posting. Okay, so what will be the process? So will in internal job posting, the process will be different. We will have to share it internally with the team and carry on with the recruitment. When it is external, then we will have to hire an agency or advertise, get applications. How, what will be the selection process in the selection committee? So how will that happen? So the selection is part of recruitment. Selection means the basis on which you have recruited that particular person. Okay. Process of skill matching basically means that whatever is our job description and whatever is the skill of that particular person, that matching has to be done finally by the selection committee, so that we have the right kind of person for delivering the job description. Okay. uh, so that is called as matching, or sometimes called as fitment. Okay. uh, how will it be approved? What will be the documentation for recruitment process? What will be the background verification of that person, just to see that all the documents that they have, that he or she has shared, are genuine? Okay, and we don't find it subsequently that there is something false that had been given. Appointment letter and onboarding. Now, once the onboarding is done, there is a process of induction. So there will be an orientation of that employee. That is what is called induction. And there can be a period of probation, which is a trial period. Sometimes you can call it a trial period, where both organization and the employee are saying, for the next 3 months, next 6 months, it is all dependent on the HR policy. We will see whether we are, in terms of our fitment at the selection and recruitment stage, was all right, but are we good to go for a long period of time? That at Therefore, this period is a trial period, where at the end of the probation period, the organization might decide and the person might decide. If they all decide, that both decide that, well, we are fit for each other, we need each other, then there is probation, results into confirmation. Otherwise, at the probation stage, if the fitment is not proper, if the understanding is not proper, then during the probation, after the probation, the confirmation doesn't come, tantamounts to the fact that we do not want to continue with you. Now, as far as work norms are concerned, what is the hours of work? What is the location where you will work? What is the dress code? What is the attendance rules? Now, several of these, the hours of work, the work location, all that is also directed by the Shops and Establishments Act, if it is applicable to your state, is what will decide the work norms for policy. Okay. Dress code is something which is not mandatory. How will attendance, what is the attendance system? Sorry, not systems, it's systems. What is the attendance system? Whether it is through cloud, whether it is through physical registers, or whether it is through a software or an app. A lot of them are now available, which are very, very cheap. So how will the attendance be actually captured for the work that is being done? So that is the that those are all provisions related to work norms. Uh, Now coming on, so that will be included compensation and benefits. You would all know what are the uh, what are the elements of compensation. Elements means the breakup. What is the basic? What is the HRA? What is special allowance? What about EPF? What about ESI? What about gratuity? What about anything which is in terms of insurance? So, uh, uh, does the organization have a salary band for various positions, and where is the fixation is happening? What is the process for annual increments? Okay, any other benefits that are given, the insurance, communication allowance, etc., etc., whatever. What is the reward recognition policies for the benefits? Uh, so those are the various parts. And unless you have the compensation breakdown or the elements of compensation, you will never be able to explain it to the employee. And second, you will never be able to correctly budget for the compensation in your HR budget. So it's very important to have this detail of the compensation and breakdown and the benefits that are available. So gratuity might be a benefit which the organization might be providing. It may not be actually being charged from the employee, because the employee will get this benefit after 5 years, but can you insure it through a group gratuity scheme and claim the gratuity amount from the donor and keep that with the in your gratuity policy. So all those provisions are something that will be actually provided there in the compensation policy. Leave and holiday policy, what are the different types of leaves? Now, sometimes the leave policy should is dependent on the Shops and Establishment Act, if it is applicable, which will decide, which will say what types of leaves. But if not all leaves, at least the annual earned leave is something that the Shops and Establishment Act
Present
is.
Chennai, sir.
Uh,
First,
so the Shops and Establishment Act talks about earned leave, which is the annual earned leave. That's not mentioned anywhere in law. But please remember that if you're covered under the Shops and Establishment Act, you'll have to register there and also see whether annual or for having worked for a year, you will be entitled for earned leave or not. The other types of leave is something which might not be all mandated by the law. You will have to decide, sick leave, the casual leave, the maternity leave is is a statutory requirement, any paternity leave, anything like that. How will you avail those leaves? What do you get the leaves during probation? You might not get the leaves during probation, but the leaves can be accumulated. Is there encashment of leave? Is there accumulation of leave? What is the maximum accumulation of leave? All that is there. What is the provision relating to public holidays? How many public holidays will be provided, and on what basis will the central government public holiday list decide the number of public holidays? All those are the part of your policy on leave and uh, holidays. Performance management basically is performance evaluation. Okay. uh, at the end of every year or periodically, what is the mechanism for assessing your performance? Why? Because either in terms of promotion or in terms of increase in or non increase in your remuneration or your compensation, or even continuation of your employment, there has to be a system of performance management or measurement. Okay, so how will that performance measurement will done? Will it be based on only your competency or your merit, or will it be also based on your on values, or a combination of both of them? What will be the weightage? What will be the mechanism? Is there a feedback mechanism for from other people in the organization for you? That will be, so that those formats for not only your appraisal but for feedback, for the appraisal by your supervisor, and then recommendation in terms of a promotion or an increase in remuneration or no increase in remuneration. All that is part of the performance management process. Now, the compensation breakdown, the performance management structure is so important, because then it will decide, in your budget you have a 10% escalation for HR. Why do you have that 10% escalation? Because at the end of every year, there will be a performance measurement. And in the budget, you have a provision of 10% or 5% or 8%, whatever you have taken. That is the amount that will be paid from that budget in the next year based on the performance uh, measurement or performance management, which is part of your HR man. Then you have promotion, as I said. Will it be time based? Will it be merit based? How will the promotion for promotion? Uh, Will it be to another department? Will it be within the same function? All those things. What are the criteria that will be relevant for promotion? Is the past performance reports important? Is there promotion only when there is a possibility of, a new position, higher position, which is getting vacant through internal job posting? Will you be able to get that promotion? Or every 5 years you will get promotion, is something that will have to be put in the promotion policy. Okay. uh, what will be the documentary, what will be the organizational structure for taking the decision? Is there a promotion committee that will be formed, and who will be part of that promotion committee? All that will be part of the promotion policy. Then comes the transfer relocation policy, which is basically, you have been placed at one location now, and you might see in your employment letter you can be transferred to any location where the organization works. That's where it is. So what will be the mechanism for transfer, or what we call as relocation? Okay, who will, what will the organization pay during the process of transfer? Okay, if you are transferred within the same office, that's not a problem. But if you are transferred from one location to another, that's called a relocation, and that relocation will require transfer of your household, yourself, your family. So what are the entitlements as far as relocation is concerned, if the transfer is uh, beyond the current location? Now, the transfer can also be with from one function to another, which is cross functional transfer. So the transfer can be based on your job responsibility. The transfer can be based on from one location to another at the same job responsibility. So that is what it is. Now, as far as nepotism is concerned, if there is any family relative or a immediate relative, and that is defined as who's a relative, if you are engaging with hiring that particular person, then that is nepotism. In certain organizations, the policy says no nepotism, so we will not allow. But if there are some liberal organization which will say a relative, an immediate blood relative can be engaged, then what is the provision? Will that person be engaged in the same department as you are working in a different department? What will be the rules for that engagement? What will be the rules for hiring a person who is related? Because then there has to be an arm's length relationship. You cannot be part of the selection committee. You have to, ensure that there is proper conduct in terms of ensuring that if nepotism is allowed, that person is not given undue advantage in terms of selection. All that is what is called nepotism. Prevention sexual harassment, this is the mandatory policy that I said. Now you can have the prevention of sexual harassment at workplace policy in the HR policy also. So it says that based on on the law, you will have to mandatorily frame that policy. Now, if the number of employees is more than 10, then you will have to have an internal committee, the internal complaints committee. You will have to create awareness about that committee, about awareness about the policy, so that people can refer any matters. The policy might be neutral in terms of gender also, so it can apply both to women and men. Then there are annual reporting requirements by the internal complaints committee for in cases where it has been constituted for employees more than 10. So the internal complaints committee will submit an annual report to the management, because it's a different committee from the management, and also to the local district authority. Maybe the collector is the district authority, saying what were the cases, what were the awareness, what was happening, constitution of the internal complaints committee. It will be displayed on your prominently in your office. All that will be provided in this particular policy. This can be separate, but it can be also a part of the HR policy. Now, the code of conduct, grievance and redressal, and code of ethics, I have combined them. Basically, code of conduct says, as an employee, how will you conduct yourself? You'll have to show respect, you'll have to show honesty, you'll have to respect diversity, equity and inclusion. Okay, so you'll have different kind of people, you will have to show respect and treat them similarly. Punctuality, no gifts to be taken. Safety, health and environment in which you work, what are the conditions? Record keeping. Fraud, inquiry for fraud, that's if your conduct is fraudulent. Disciplinary action in case there's some such situation. What is the procedure? So I'm not getting into detail, but what I'm saying is your behavior will be governed by the code of conduct within part of conduct policy, within part of the HR manual or policy. Grievance and redressal, what are the types of grievances that can be there against people, against organization? What can be the reason for grievances, and what is the grievance redressal procedure? The code of ethics means you have to be ethical. You have to display principles of ethics in your behavior. So things like anti-corruption, things like bribery, what are the policy? If you are being unethical or you are doing something wrong, can that matter be referred to by somebody within the organization, which is called as the whistleblower policy? Somebody, presses the blows the whistle. Matlab CT, the whistle that you normally see children blowing. So that is from there only this whistleblowing policy has come. So why do you have a whistle with a policeman, which when he blows the whistle, then he is saying, please stop. So that is what, so that it doesn't say stop, but the whistleblower is a person who is saying there is unethical behavior happening, something corrupt happening. Then that particular person, that particular policy is whistleblowing policy. So how will that procedure, how will we ensure the safety of that person who is anonymity of that person who has blowed the whistle, and what will be the policy relating to a complaint that has been made under the whistleblowing policy? What will be the authority which will decide whether the whistleblowing that has been done is correct or not? What action has to be done? All that is part of the whistleblowing. Use of assets and property, we have already said. You have this will this is more to do with the assets that have been issued to you, the assets that have been issued, the property of the organization. In the finance policy we had talked about fixed assets and inventory. That is in terms of procurement and issue. But here, if you or say for instance laptop, so how was it procured, how was it actually paid, how was it recorded in the books? All that is finance. How is it issued? Now, but once it is issued to you, email connection is issued to you, that there the finance policy ends. But the HR policy says now you'll have to ensure that it is, put used safely. You do not misuse it. All that is, the email policy, the social media policy is all something in terms of the digital resources. So this physical security safeguarding, the value of the asset is not diminished by wrong use or careless use. That is what will come in the HR policy. The apprenticeship policy is, if your staff strength is more than 30, then as per the Apprentices Act of 1961, and we had seen that, you will have to engage interns or apprentices, for which you will have to make policy. So depending upon the kind of apprentices, you will have to follow the Act of 1961 and fix the stipend for those people. Though they are not employees, but they are interns. So between 2.5 to 15% of your of that 30, beyond that 30 is the number of apprentices that you have to engage. So there are compliances under the act, uh, in terms of sharing the contracts and ensuring that the right work environment is there. Uh, if they And what is an intern? An intern is basically somebody who's doing a course, and the organization is the one which can further help that person in practical knowledge for that course. Not just like that, but because the organization is working into an area which specializes. So somebody is doing a course in rural livelihood, for instance. Now it can come to an organization which is into watershed, which is into farm, off farm, because that organization can help provide practical knowledge for that intern to complete. And after the internship or apprenticeship period is over, there could be a possibility of that apprentice, because he or she has the right knowledge in terms of education, and also the practical exposure with this organization, can be engaged as an employee, because that is the right fitment that will have to be ensured. HR records basically means retention of records relating to HR. We had seen in the accounting section in the finance policy, maintenance of books of accounts and record retention, that is governed by law. But here you will have to decide how long will the policies be there. Now there are some other policies that I am just mentioning. The risk management policy is something that we will do in the next session. Okay, so basically what we are going to do is the risk and controls and risk management as one of the policies. Okay, mapping the risk. Okay, identifying the risk, mapping the risk, prioritizing the risk, managing the risk. That is the risk process. And that risk process is to be repeated. It's not a one time static process, it's a dynamic process. Then you have a conflict of interest policy. So the risk management policy is something that I'm going to do with you next time. The conflict of interest policy is also becoming a very important policy for donors. Now, what is conflict of policy? Conflict of policy means that I am into a certain position. I am a board member, okay? But I am also into the board of another organization. Uh, and that organization has come to my organization for getting some work. Am I using, am I using my current position in the board to get that organization to deal with me, my organization, is the question. So that is a conflict situation because I am into two different places. And because of my being in two different places, that conflict of interest might actually have to be stated, have to be dealt. That is what it is. Suppose your relative is a vendor and you are in the position where you are issuing that particular vendor a bid, a request for quotation. That's a conflict situation. Even nepotism is a conflict of interest situation. So can be so many situations. Suppose I, as a board member, I have another organization which I run, and if am I trying to get that organization some work because of the fact that I'm on the board here? That's a conflict of interest situation. Now, can conflict of situation interest situations happen? Yes, they can happen. They can happen. Now, I saw, but you will have to document it in by way of a conflict of interest policy. Now, there is a organization where the spouse is actually the secretary of the organization, and the husband is basically the chief executive officer. Now, this is management and governance, but they are both related. In some cases, they are blood relatives. Now, because of their being blood relatives, on issues which concern somewhere conflict, some situations of conflict, that should be dealt with by this conflict of interest policy. That this person, if there is some situation of conflict, will not be part of the discussion of this for this particular thing. Suppose I am a board member and my own organization's proposal for some funding or some partnership is being considered. So I will recuse myself from there, from discussion there, so that I do not bring my interest into that proposal and influence indirectly or directly the board in terms of taking a decision. That's what is called as conflict of interest. So what are the situations of or identify situations of conflict? How will we handle that conflict? Okay. And report conflict of interest. So I can report and say, this is a proposal in which I am interested, and as a board member, I am disclosing this conflict of interest. Sometimes the rules and regulations require that the board members should disclose conflict of interest in writing. But does it mean that if there is an interest in a particular proposal, can that not be taken at all? No, it is not that way. But that conflict of interest situation has to be dealt with or handled through a policy is what I'm actually trying to say. Disaster management policy and security policy are basically all to address the security risk, anything which can physically cause harm to our organization. Do we have those policies? Now, sometimes disaster management and security policy can be part of the HR policy also. How do we ensure security? Through insurance, through business insurance of our office, I mean, we have seen fixed assets insurance, but for office, for our people, all that is something that can be seen more specifically for office in case of any disaster. So with that, I come to the end of this presentation. The key takeaway from this presentation is that organizations need to have policies. One, the policies have to be tailor made. Number two, the third thing is that the tailor making of that policy should be based on the stage of evolution of that organization and an estimation for the next couple of years. Okay, it should not be copied. Fourth, that such policies that have been made are approved by the board and implemented. Okay, implemented actually in right spirit, in letter and spirit. They should not just be filed. So somebody will be responsible for ensuring implementation, the finance policy by the head of finance, the head of HR for HR, other policies by the chief executive. And at the end of the day, the policy implementation is being done is something which is the responsibility of the governance or the board of governing body, because the trust in because of the policies is something that has to be vouched by the governing body. Then we come to actual areas of policy framework. So I had said that there can be many areas, but as we were progressing, I kept on telling you that all areas of work except program implementation. Now you would remember that for program implementation there is no policy. However, there can be program implementation policy also, and there should be. How will you plan a program? How will you design? How will you do the log frame? How will you do the monitoring? How will you do the MIS? Is that not program implementation? And can you not standardize or customize it based on the programs that you are there, so that when the people in your ground are actually working, they understand the program implementation process and procedure consistently, so that there is no misunderstanding? Can the design say, well, if we were to do on ground implementation, these are the various ways or strategies, that we can, if we have to do random, implementation, how will we do that? How will we monitor? That is the MIS part. How will we generate MIS? How will it be recorded? What will we do with that MIS in terms of generating reports for decision making on programming? All that can also be part of program implementation policy. Generally, I have not seen program implementation policy, but all organizations should have finance policy, which can be inclusive of admin, risk management, and conflict of interest policy as a single policy, and all other aspects of work can be combined, can be put into the human resource policy. So what we suggest is that have only two policy formulations, so that you don't have to give too many policy documents at the time of induction of a person. Okay, the admin finance policy, which will include everything, travel, procurement, everything will be included there, and the HR policy, which will have all aspects of human resource management included in the HR policy. So with that, I complete my uh, session on key policies. Uh, I'm not saying that there cannot be any other policy. There can be. I'm not saying that there cannot be, but it will all, again, as I said, I want to again and again say that policies have, and the coverage of policies are totally based on the stage at which you are, and plus another 2 to 3 years. The more you adhere to this principle, the simpler, easier, and implementable the policies will be. And if they are easier to understand, simple in terms of implementation, then they will be more readily followed by staff. I was just seeing an HR policy where the code of conduct chapter is 50 pages or 30 pages, and that cannot be even understood by the people in that organization. So what's the point in having that policy? Policy should be relevant to the organization, is what I'm actually saying. This is the key takeaway. But whether there should be a policy framework, yes, the answer is very much yes, because we saw the key aspects of policy. Unless policies are there, people will not know how to conduct themselves in various areas, and we will be exposed to all kinds of risks, because policies is a tool of internal controls. So with that, I come to a stop, and I am uh, now going to some of the, uh, I have a query from the last session. Oh, so Tanima is asking about the 15% of income which we can set aside as reserves for the Income Tax Act. Does the set aside has to be spent over 5 years? Please remember that 100 rupees example that I had given, and I had said 85 rupees you have to spend. The 15 rupees which you set aside, which will now in the new income tax will be called as uh, accumulation, is something for which there is no time limit. When you accumulate general reserve, that general reserve does not have a time frame. This 5 year is where you did not spend your 85%, not for the 15%, but where you did not spend your 85% and you spent, say, 70%, and you had 15%. Sorry, I gave you the example. In fact, I should have said you spent 75% and you had 10% left. Then you had to take a call of whether you want to apply, consider it as deemed application, okay, in next year, or do you want to carry it as an accumulation for 5 years? Now, these provisions of 5 years and 1 year also are going to change in the new income tax bill, which will become an act probably in April 2026. But the current situation is what I'm saying. So the answer to your question, whether the set aside of 15% from your income, if you have spent 85%, is for 5 years, answer is no. Uh, to avoid the statutory compliances and burden, NGOs use different terminology for human resources costs. Uh, Yes, you are absolutely right. So this is a comment that Nilappa is making. Let me tell you that once the new labor codes are going, so what they are actually doing is, and let us also face it like this. This is not an HR session, but what I'm trying to say is that because in the last session when we had talked about social security benefit, after crossing a certain threshold, the social security benefit is applicable. Organizations neither want to register, nor do they want to comply, nor do they want to give that benefit to the staff, although they can give it and also claim it from the donor. That's the positive spirit with which we should work, but then the negative spirit, and that is all our problem. So what they do is they might make people consultants for 11 months, continue them for 11 months. They may give them a contract for 11 months under 194C, deduct 1% TDS. The others who might be slightly skilled, they might actually make them professional consultants and tax them at 10%. One, I want to say that consultants cannot replace the work of an employee. So if the work is such that can be done repeatedly by an employee, that will not be considered as consultant work. Second thing is that consultants cannot be engaged for long period of time. Similar is the question as far as contract is concerned, but that is something that is being done. However, in the new labor code, if the core activity of an organization, for instance, in our organization, the core activity is program. Now, the new labor codes are going to make it mandatory that for core activity, the work cannot be done on through contract workers. Okay, this is something that I want to just mention. But you are right. Uh, Organizations are circumventing the compliance of social security laws, but they are putting a lot of law, they are giving a lot of laws to the employees, number one, and they are second, they are not even complying with those laws. Third is that they can actually charge it to the donors, okay, but they are not doing it, and therefore they will never become big. I mean, they'll not grow up actually, as I say. Now, the next question is, if the company is registered under Shops Act, the maximum accumulation is up to 45 days. Can we put a cap on the earned leave to be carried forward? Uh, you please see your Shops and Establishment Act. Is there so if you are in a state where Shops and Establishment Act is uh, clearly uh, applicable. Say, for instance, if you are in Delhi, okay, and the Shops and Establishment Act is applicable because charity institutions are covered, as society is covered under the definition of commercial establishment in that act. If that is the case, please read the provision relating to earned leave, because earned leave is part of the Shops and Establishment Act, is not there in any other law. Okay, so you see what is it, what can be the carried forward, and what is the maximum amount of accumulation. If there is no such ceiling, it will depend on at what stage your organization is and what do you consider as accumulation. Sometimes encashment is also provided. So all that is something that you will have to see basic compliance with the Shop and Establishment Act in terms of earned leave, and beyond that, if you want to give additional benefit, it is for you to see. Now, the other question is, can we restrict the leave during notice period? I think during notice period, there is no leave. Can we, so you can make that mention uh, part of your HR policy and also a part of your appointment letters. Uh, can we restrict on the consecutive earned leave days? So what Tanima is saying is, uh, prefixing and suffixing leaves. Okay. So your, again, your policy. So your policy might say that after taking sick leave of these many days, you cannot take earned leave. There has to be a break. So that is something that is not part of law. That is part of procedure, because that will help you ensure that manpower utilization is best. That is for you to decide. Uh, is it important to cover insurance for the beneficiaries of the uh, project? I don't know what you're saying. Insurance for beneficiaries of the project is not something which is mandatory. When we are talking of social security benefits, I'm not talking of beneficiaries. I'm talking of our employees, of our labor. It's not the beneficiaries. Now, the second aspect is your project talking about any insurance for beneficiaries because of some reason? Then that is a different matter. That is not part of law. That is part of the project design. Okay, if I can understand the question properly. So with that, uh, I have taken all the questions in chat. If there are any questions, people can unmute and ask another 2-3 minutes.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, I'm Nilappa here. So, in regard to my insurance question regarding the beneficiaries, what
Oh,
I'm trying to say is here, actually, no organization running trainings, and they are working on a children projects. Okay, something is during the training session or during the workshop or something is happen unexpectedly. So to cover that, to mitigate that loss to the family or the parents, so is it important to have the insurance coverage?
so Nilappa, as far as you are concerned, you are covered, okay, because your Quest Alliance is actually covering you. Now, what you are saying is people who are coming for attending the training, okay, if something happens, is Quest Alliance responsible for that? Number one, that you can take as a call, and you can give a disclaimer when you invite them for training that during the travel, during your stay, or during the time that you are in the venue, uh, please be careful so that there is no mishap. Now, if Quest says no, we will want to cover them in terms of at least the venue, because you really cannot cover them for travel, then probably you might have to work with an insurance provide service provider to have a specific activity based insurance for such workshops or for such trainings. Nelappa, I haven't heard of anything like this in so many years of my doing trainings. So, for instance, last week I did a 3-day on site training in Raipur. I think it didn't occur in my head. We had about 40 odd people. But what I suggest is that you can tell the trainees as a disclaimer in your invitation that for coming to the training, during training in the venue and elsewhere, please take sufficient precaution that you don't fall sick, you do not end up injuring yourself, is something that will help you absolve yourself from any kind of a liability. But if you think you would still want to do that and Quest Alliance wants to do that, I don't know what the rationale will be or reason for doing that will be, but then you can talk to an insurance service provider for, just as you have travel insurance for an international travel, they might have some such product, or they might design some such product for that particular workshop, and that could be applicable for similar workshops. I mean, same policy they might give you for X number of workshops with the premium, so that you can work out with them. But I don't see a standard offering like that happening. uh, or the other way is to absolve yourself from any such indemnity by making a disclaimer.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thanks for that explanation.
All right. So, if there are questions, you can come up, but in on WhatsApp or on email. the designated this thing. The next session will be on risks and control. Very, very important session, because now the kind of risk that we are facing is actually questioning our existence. So we'll do that session, and it's very, very interesting. The It'll actually kind of summarize a lot of what we have done when we look at controls. So we have done a lot in terms of procurement policy as part of the finance policy, because we thought that it deserved that importance. So see you next week on the 19th at 11. Please do join in. That's our session number 7. And we have one more session on the 26th. Thank you very much for your patience, for your participation.